If you ever watched TV in the 1970s, then you probably saw Peter Falk as Lieutenant Columbo doing a false exit. Columbo was a homicide detective with the Los Angeles Police Department, and he outwitted criminals by presenting himself as a bumbling and awkward police officer. He wore a worn-out trench coat, he seemed forgetful, and struggled to stay on topic when interviewing suspects. But his strategic incompetence worked to first disarm suspects and then frustrate them into saying too much, until they slipped up and incriminated themselves. And just when the suspect thought the interview was over and Columbo was heading to the door to leave, Columbo did his signature false exit. Columbo paused at the door, he turns back around and says to the murderer, just one more thing, and raises a point or a question about the evidence that isn't adding up. And the suspect, caught off guard, says something self-incriminating. Sometimes the last thing said before you leave is the most important thing to pay attention to. The last thing Jesus says to his disciples may be the most important thing we need to pay attention to. The Easter Jesus spent 40 days comforting and teaching his followers. And just before he ascends to heaven, just before he heads for the door, he says, "You have the power of the Holy Spirit with you, and you will be my witnesses to the end of the earth." And then Jesus is gone. Now, you can say from the scene that Jesus was the original Columbo, not because the scene is a fake exit, but because the name Columbo means dove, or a dove keeper, and the dove is a symbol for the Holy Spirit, who Jesus has gifted to his disciples. The last thing Jesus says to his disciples, and by extension the last words of Jesus to us, are, "You will be my witness to the whole world." The last thing Jesus says to us is, don't keep this a secret, but tell people. Reveal me to the world. And maybe the better way to put it is, tell people about us. Reveal us to the world. Tell the world about our relationship so that they can also have a relationship with me. Sounds easy enough, but Columbo demonstrates that the last words can be the most difficult words, the words that trip us up. Now, I'm in the United Church of Canada, and if there's one thing that we find difficult, if there's one thing that trips us up, it's witnessing to our faith. We struggle to tell people about our relationship with Jesus. Sure, there are all kinds of cultural, social, and historical reasons why that we could give as an alibi for not talking about our faith. But I think we've exhausted all our excuses that blame others for our decisions to keep Jesus' last words to us. Every time we hear and rehear these last words of Jesus, our hearts and our integrity are convicted. A psychologist once analyzed the technique that Columbo uses with this false exit. When Columbo stops at the door and says, "Just one more thing," the one more thing is a puzzle. Columbo juxtaposes discrepancies. He names two things that don't fit together. When Columbo interviews the murder suspect, the suspect is hard at work spinning a story that tries to paint the detective point the detective in a different direction, away from the murderer. Columbo lulls the murder suspect by pretending to consult. Columbo shares all the evidence, all the facts of the case, the pieces of the puzzle that have been gathered together so far. And then Columbo invites the suspect to propose a theory, a grand theory, that holds all the evidence together into a logical and coherent explanation that will hopefully point the detective to the killer. And of course, the murder suspect welcomes this opportunity to frame the evidence in a way that points Columbo away from the true murderer and onto a false path. Columbo pretends like he buys the murderer's theory, he heads for the door, but turns around at the last moment and says, "Just one more thing," and points to a discrepancy in the murderer's theory. Columbo points to two puzzle pieces that aren't fitting together to solve the puzzle. Columbo juxtaposes discrepancies, and that catches the murderer off guard. And in a panic to quickly explain away the discrepancy, some contradiction, some crack is exposed in the murderer's grand theory, and the house of cards falls down around the murderer. We United Church folk all have our theories and explanations for why we can't or shouldn't talk publicly about our faith. We point to televangelists and their charlatan ways. We rationalize that proselytizing is unethical and disrespects diversity. We justify our silence because we claim that actions speak louder than words, as though actions and words must always be mutually exclusive. We're content to have a private relationship with God, shared perhaps with other members of our social club. And then Jesus pauses at the door, and the last thing he says to us undermines our well-rehearsed excuses. Jesus says, "You have the power of the Holy Spirit with you, and you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth." Are we convicted? Columbo is what they call a reverse whodunit. A reverse whodunit, also called an open mystery, lets the audience in on the murderer's identity from the start. So with Columbo, we know who the murderer is. The thrill of the story is watching as the truth is revealed, how the truth resists being hidden any longer. The truth needs to be revealed before justice can flow and the victim can be at peace. Columbo is merely a humble, unassuming, and at first glance, awkward servant of the truth, leading to justice and peace. We read the gospel stories of Jesus like an open mystery. We know the puzzle pieces that reveal the mystery. The Jesus story is an open mystery to us. But the mystery still unfolds for us as we watch and listen to the disciples, their encounter with Jesus. Jesus is the Columbo, and the disciples are drawn into the holy mystery like unsuspecting suspects, being convicted, discovering who they are and what God expects of them. The same thing is expected of us. You have the power of the Holy Spirit, and you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth. Just one more thing, but maybe the most important thing. Amen.